9 missiles, 80 targets. And Israel couldn't stop what came next. In just a few hours, the entire war changed. What happened between March 18th and 19th was not another exchange of fire. It was a strategic shift. And if you missed it, you missed the moment this conflict stopped being a regional war and started becoming something the entire world will feel. Let's break it down from the beginning. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps launched 9 Kheibar Shekan 4 ballistic missiles towards central Israel in the early hours of March 19th. But here's what most coverage completely missed. These were not ordinary missiles. Each one carried a warhead designed to split mid-flight into 24 separate bomblets. Each bomblet packs roughly 11 pounds of high explosive, and once they release, they scatter across a 5-mile radius, raining down on everything below. Homes, roads, fields, military positions. No warning, no precision, just fire from the sky covering the area of a mid-sized city district. This was Wave 64 of Operation True Promise 4. The IRGC called it the largest coordinated strike package since the war began. 80 military and military support targets, hit in a single concentrated window. From Eilat in the deep south all the way to Haifa in the far north. Not spread across days, one window, 80 targets. Now pause on that number for a second. Because Israel had publicly stated it destroyed more than 70% of Iran's ballistic missile launchers. If that figure is accurate, what just happened makes no strategic sense. Either those assessments were wrong, or Iran kept reserves hidden so well they survived the entire campaign untouched. Either explanation carries serious implications. We'll come back to that. But the missiles were only part of what Iran unleashed that night. At the same time, Iranian ballistic missiles were striking central Israel. Hezbollah opened fire from the north. Synchronized salvos into Haifa, Nahariya, and across the Galilee. Roughly 100 rockets per day. Timed to land in the same window as the Iranian launches. This was not coincidence. On March 11th, the IRGC publicly confirmed for the first time that Wave 40 of Operation True Promise 4 was a joint coordinated operation between the Revolutionary Guards and what they called the Lebanese Resistance. That is the first official public acknowledgement of real-time operational synchronization between Iran and Hezbollah during this war. And the pattern on March 18th and 19th proved it was not a one-time event. The strategic logic is brutal in its simplicity. Force Israel's layered air defense system to respond to threats coming from multiple directions at once. From the east, from the north, from above. Saturate the system, make it choose. Because every interceptor has a cost, every radar has limits. And every system, no matter how advanced, has a ceiling. Israel's Arrow system is designed to intercept ballistic missiles at high altitude. And it works. But here's the problem the Kheibar Shekan 4 creates that most analysts are not explaining clearly enough. A successful Arrow intercept does not automatically stop the bomblets. If the parent missile is destroyed after the submunitions have already separated, which can happen during the terminal descent phase, those bomblets are already in freefall. Small, fast, falling from the stratosphere. At that point, they are effectively impossible to intercept. Israeli defense experts say the only reliable solution is to destroy the parent missile as high as possible before separation occurs, ideally with Arrow 3. Once those 24 bomblets come free, the math changes completely. Tal Inbar, a missile expert who works with Israeli defense firms, described cluster warheads directly as a mechanism designed to bypass active missile defense. He also pointed out something revealing. Iran may be leaning harder into cluster warhead designs precisely because its overall missile inventory has been reduced by sustained American and Israeli strikes. Fewer launchers means each missile that does launch needs to deliver maximum damage. The cluster warhead solves that problem. It multiplies the destructive footprint of a single launch. And then, an Israeli military official said something on record that should be quoted carefully. He called Israel's air defenses among the best in the world, and then immediately said the defense is not airtight. When a serving military official uses that language in public, the gaps he's describing are real. The human cost of those gaps is already visible. 2 construction workers killed in Yehud, near Tel Aviv. They were outdoors on a job site when the bomblets fell. A couple in their 70s killed in Ramat Gan, found just outside their safe room. A 30-year-old foreign worker killed at Moshav Adanim by cluster shrapnel. 3 Palestinian women killed in the West Bank by Iranian missiles. The first fatalities in that territory since this war began. Israeli health officials were urging citizens to run to bomb shelters carefully because people were injuring themselves in the rush. 5 million Israelis in shelters, schools shut, parliament barely functioning. And yet, public support for continuing the war remains high. That psychological gap between daily disruption and national resolve is one of the defining dynamics of this entire conflict. Now here is where the story shifts from military to something more dangerous. On March 18th, Israel struck Iran's South Pars gas field. South Pars is not just any target. It is the single largest natural gas reserve on the planet, shared between Iran and Qatar in the Persian Gulf. Iranian President Pezeshkian warned of what he called uncontrollable consequences that could engulf the entire world. That is not standard diplomatic language. That is a direct warning that the rules of engagement have changed. Within hours, the IRGC responded under the Wave 63 designation. And what came next had nothing to do with military installations in Israel. They hit energy infrastructure across the entire Gulf region simultaneously. Qatar's Ras Laffan. Industrial City took direct missile strikes. Ras Laffan is not a secondary facility. It is the largest liquefied natural gas production complex on Earth. It supplies roughly 20% of global LNG exports. Qatar Energy reported significant fires and extensive structural damage. Production had already been suspended since March the 2nd after earlier drone strikes. Energy analysts at Wood Mackenzie assessed that the new structural damage from this latest round could delay any restart by more than 2 months. Saudi Arabia's Yanbu refinery on the Red Sea coast was struck next. That location matters enormously. The Saudis had been routing oil exports west through the Red Sea specifically to bypass the closed Strait of Hormuz. Iran hit the bypass route. 2 Kuwaiti oil refineries were set on fire. The UAE's Habshan gas facility and the Shah gas field in Abu Dhabi were forced into emergency shutdown. In the span of hours, Iran had methodically targeted energy infrastructure from one end of the Gulf to the other. Brent crude surged toward $118 a barrel and was holding around $113 by Thursday. European natural gas prices jumped roughly 25% in a single day and were running more than 60% above pre-war levels. The Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed. 20% of global oil and 20% of global LNG supply pass through that waterway. The economic pressure is not theoretical. It is already in the numbers. The IRGC issued a statement after the Gulf strikes that deserves to be taken seriously. They said that if this is repeated, subsequent attacks on your energy infrastructure and that of your allies will not cease until total destruction. That is not rhetoric. That is an operational declaration with a specific condition attached. Qatar expelled Iran's military attachés and gave them 24 hours to leave the country. Saudi Arabia's top diplomat stated publicly that whatever trust existed before has been completely shattered. These are Gulf states that have historically tried to maintain some level of working relationship with Tehran. That posture is now gone. Meanwhile, the American footprint in this conflict is expanding in ways that are not being widely discussed. The Pentagon has requested more than $200 billion in war funding from Congress. 13 U.S. service members have been killed across the region. The U.S. has conducted strikes against more than 7,000 targets inside Iran. The IRGC claimed it struck the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain with medium-range missiles. Bahrain alone has intercepted nearly 300 missiles and drones since this war began. That is one small Gulf nation absorbing a volume of fire that would overwhelm most NATO members. 3 Israeli officials told Reuters that the South Pars strike was coordinated with Washington. Trump publicly said the United States had no prior knowledge of it. Both of those statements cannot simultaneously be true. And that contradiction tells you something important about how fractured the information environment around this war has become. When official accounts this significant contradict each other openly, the space for miscalculation gets larger. Now look at the full picture at once. Iran's launchers are reportedly 70% destroyed. Its air defenses are reportedly 85% neutralized. And it just executed a synchronized 80-target strike package across the full length of Israel while simultaneously igniting Gulf energy infrastructure from Qatar to Kuwait to Abu Dhabi to Saudi Arabia. Either those damage assessments are significantly overstated, or Iran maintained dispersed reserves that survived years of targeting and the entire active campaign. Both possibilities are alarming for different reasons. Hezbollah still holds an estimated 25,000 missiles, 10,000 drones, and thousands of trained Rod-1 fighters according to ACL analysis. Since March 3rd, the group has claimed more than 280 separate attack waves. Over 1 million Lebanese civilians have been displaced. That represents nearly 20% of the entire Lebanese population. More than 968 people killed, including over 100 children. And Major General Rafi Milo, commanding Israel's northern front, used language that does not point toward a short timeline. He called Hezbollah's re-entry into the war a serious mistake, and then said the strikes will continue and their intensity will increase. This is where we have to be honest about what the conflict has actually become. Most coverage frames this as a missile exchange with casualties on both sides. What March 18th and 19th actually represented was a coordinated attempt to impose costs, not just on Israel, but on the entire architecture of global energy supply. Iran struck the world's largest LNG facility. It struck the alternative oil export route Saudi Arabia built to avoid Hormuz. It shut down facilities in the UAE. And it did all of it within hours of a single Israeli strike on South Pars. The message was deliberate. If you target what we depend on, we target what the global economy depends on. That is a different kind of leverage. and it is one that reaches far beyond the borders of any country currently firing missiles. No party in this conflict has publicly defined what winning looks like. Not Washington, not Tehran, not Jerusalem. The Pentagon is requesting $200 billion with no stated end condition. Iran is escalating while absorbing strikes on its own territory. Israel is sustaining a multi-front war while 5 million citizens shelter underground. And the global energy market is already absorbing damage that compounds with every passing week. The silence from every capital on what an acceptable outcome actually looks like is not a diplomatic gap. It is the most dangerous signal in this entire war. Because wars without defined endpoints do not end, they expand.